The morning sun filtered through lace curtains, casting dappled patterns across the worn oak floors of Eleanor Thompson's kitchen. At 67, her fingers moved with practiced grace as she reached for her favorite sunflower mug, the last gift from Robert before cancer claimed him 2 decades ago. 40 years in this brick house on Maple Street had etched its rhythms into Eleanor's bones. The familiar creak of the third stair, the way the afternoon light caught the crystal wind chimes Robert had hung on their 5th anniversary, the subtle scent of lemon polish that never quite faded from the dining room table where they'd celebrated 20 Christmases together. The voice of time itself seemed to whisper through the hallways Eleanor Thompson had built more than a home here. She had crafted a sanctuary of memories. Eleanor, Ellie to those who knew her heart, stirred honey into her morning tea, watching as her tabby cat Muffin stretched lazily in the patch of sunlight by the back door. Outside her garden waited marigolds, standing like tiny sentinels beside the stepping stones Michael had made with his small hands when he was 5. Those uneven concrete slabs, decorated with marbles and bits of colored glass, had weathered 33 winters, just as Ellie had weathered life without Robert. Ellie's fingers traced the rim of her sunflower mug, feeling the slight chip on one edge. Imperfect like life itself, but no less cherished for its flaws. This house held her history in every corner. The height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe, tracking Michael's growth, the antique china cabinet containing her mother's wedding dishes, the weathered recliner where Robert had spent his final months watching baseball games with increasingly transparent humor about extra innings when his time came. What Ellie could not know as she gazed out at her marigolds nodding in the morning breeze was how quickly peace could fracture, how easily sanctuary could become battleground. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while Ellie was folding laundry and half listening to a documentary about monarch butterflies. Michael's voice carried an unfamiliar tremor, a vulnerability she hadn't heard since he was a teenager facing his father's diagnosis. "The tech company's cutting 30% of staff, Mom. I didn't make the cut." Ellie's heart sank for her son, the bright boy who'd worked his way through college with 2 jobs, who'd finally found his footing in a field he loved. But before she could offer comfort, Michael continued, words tumbling out like water breaching a dam. Their apartment lease was ending in 3 weeks. The building had been sold to developers, and with no income, no references for a new place. "Come home," Ellie said without hesitation, the words rising from someplace deeper than thought. "This house has always been too big for just me. You and Jessica can stay until you're back on your feet." The relief in Michael's exhale traveled through the phone line, warming Ellie's palm. "Are you sure Mom, Jessica, and I wouldn't want to impose?" "Nonsense." Ellie dismissed his concern with the practiced ease of a mother who had spent a lifetime putting her child's needs before her own. "This is your home, too." 3 days later, Ellie stood on her porch as Michael's sedan pulled into the driveway. Her son emerged first, taller than his father had been, with the same crinkles around his eyes when he smiled, though at 38, new lines of worry had formed across his forehead. Jessica followed, a slender woman with carefully highlighted hair and a designer handbag that belied their financial troubles. "Thank you so much for saving us." Jessica embraced Ellie with unexpected warmth, presenting a bouquet of tulips. "I promise we won't be in your way for long." Those first 2 weeks unfolded with surprising harmony. Jessica rose early, with Ellie helping reorganize the long-neglected pantry and suggesting more efficient arrangements for the kitchen cabinets. Evenings found the 3 of them around the dining table, sharing stories and laughter. Jessica asked about family photos, seeming genuinely interested in the history of the house. For Ellie, it was almost like having the family she'd missed since Robert's passing. The comfortable hum of other lives moving alongside hers, the simple pleasure of cooking for more than one. But like Shakespeare's finest tragedies, disaster often follows the sweetest moments of connection. The universe seemed to whisper as Ellie descended the stairs one Tuesday morning, stopping short at the threshold of her living room. The family photographs, wedding portraits, Michael's graduation the last Christmas with Robert, had vanished from the mantel and side tables. In their place stood minimalist glass candle holders and a geometric vase Ellie had never seen before. Heart-quickening, she moved to the kitchen where Jessica sat scrolling through her phone, a half-empty smoothie beside her. "Jessica, have you seen the family photographs from the living room?" Jessica glanced up, her expression neutral. "Oh, I put them away. The room looked so dated with all those old frames. I thought a cleaner aesthetic would brighten the space." The casual dismissal of decades of memories stung like an unexpected slap. "Those photos are important to me. They belong where they were." But don't you think the house needs modernizing? It's very... Jessica's perfectly manicured hand made a vague gesture. 1980s in here. Since we're staying for a while, I thought we could make it more comfortable. The word comfortable carried an unexpected weight, as if Ellie's carefully tended home had somehow been found wanting. More troubling was the shift from, we won't be in your way for long, to since we're staying for a while. The subtle change in language passed like a shadow across Ellie's consciousness. I appreciate your interest, Jessica, but I'd prefer if you'd ask before making changes to the house. That afternoon, while Jessica was out job hunting with Michael, Ellie retrieved her photographs from a cardboard box in the laundry room. As she restored each frame to its rightful place, she couldn't shake the feeling that some invisible boundary had been crossed. Yet she dismissed her unease as the natural friction of adjustment. 3 adults learning to share a space designed for family, but long inhabited by one. When Michael returned that evening, Ellie overheard Jessica's whispered commentary in the hallway. Your mom put all those old photos back. I was trying to help make the place look less like a museum. Michael's response carried the weight of exhaustion after a day of rejections. Mom's set in her ways. Let's not make it an issue. Ellie retreated to her bedroom, not wanting them to know she'd overheard. That night she wrote in her journal for the first time in months, "Is it stubborn to want to preserve the life I've built, to keep visible the memories that sustain me?" The shifting dynamic accelerated in the days that followed. Ellie would enter rooms to find furniture. Rearranged curtains replaced her crocheted throws, folded away in favor of sleek geometric pillows she'd never purchased. Each morning revealed some new alteration to the home she'd maintained for 4 decades. Michael's presence became increasingly scarce. Out networking for jobs, he said, coming home late and exhausted. When home, his attention fixed almost exclusively on Jessica, his responses to Ellie growing briefer, more distracted. The comfortable family dinners dwindled as Michael and Jessica ate takeout in front of Netflix in the spare room, declining Ellie's home-cooked meals with polite excuses about meeting friends or having eaten earlier. Ellie found herself retreating to her bedroom earlier each evening, using it as sanctuary rather than merely sleeping quarters. The house that had once been her domain now held foreign territories where she felt increasingly unwelcome. A month into this new arrangement, Ellie descended to the kitchen before dawn, reaching automatically for her sunflower mug, only to find the cabinet unexpectedly reorganized her mug nowhere among the neatly arranged glassware. Ellie searched every cabinet, the dishwasher, even checking the dining room hutch where holiday dishes were stored. Panic rose in her chest as she expanded her search, a response disproportionate to a missing coffee cup, yet perfectly calibrated to the emotional weight it carried Robert's final gift, the vessel from which she'd sipped her morning tea for 20 years, a daily ritual of remembrance more sacred than any church-going. Jessica entered as Ellie was looking behind the microwave, her movements growing frantic. "Have you seen my sunflower mug, the yellow one with the big flower on the side?" Jessica barely glanced up from her phone. "Oh, that old thing. It probably broke. You should really get new dishes anyway. Those mismatched mugs look so chaotic." The casual dismissal of something so precious stunned Ellie into momentary silence. That evening, while taking out the garbage, she spotted a flash of yellow beneath coffee grounds and vegetable peelings. Digging carefully, she retrieved the shattered remains of her sunflower mug, its handle separated cleanly from the body, the break too precise to be accidental. Holding the broken pieces in her palm, Ellie felt something crack inside her as well. Not just grief for the lost connection to Robert, but the dawning realization that this wasn't mere thoughtlessness. This was intentional erasure, a calculated reshaping of her home, and by extension, her life. Eleanor Thompson had weathered widowhood, raised a son alone, built a career from determination and grit. The voice of experience seemed to whisper as she stood in the moonlit kitchen, pieces of ceramic cradled in her palm. But she had never expected to fight for her existence in the very walls meant to shelter her. Yet confront Jessica she could not directly. Each attempt at establishing boundaries met with tears or accusations relayed through Michael. "Your mother clearly resents me being here," or "I'm just trying to help, but she criticizes everything I do." Michael, torn between loyalty to his mother and protection of his wife, increasingly chose the path of least resistance. "Mom, Jessica is just trying to help. Can't you try to be more flexible? She's going through a tough time, too." The transformation of her once attentive son into this defensive stranger wounded Ellie more deeply than Jessica's territorial marking ever could. Each time Michael dismissed her concerns or failed to notice Jessica's methodical erasure of family history, Ellie felt the loss anew, not just of her home's integrity, but of her son's perception. The invisible battle continued through April into May. Jessica replaced Ellie's floral curtains with stark gray panels that blocked the garden view Ellie had cherished for decades. The refrigerator magnets holding children's artwork from neighborhood kids disappeared, replaced by a sleek, sterile surface. The comfortable recliner where Robert had spent his final days was relegated to the basement for better flow, despite Ellie's quiet protests. One morning, Jessica mentioned casually that Ellie's kitchen smelled too much like bacon grease, suggesting that perhaps her cooking methods were outdated. When Ellie prepared traditional Sunday dinners, Jessica would open windows dramatically, commenting on the heaviness of the food. Each criticism delivered with a smile thin as paper and sharp as its edge. These 1,000 cuts might have continued indefinitely had Ellie not looked out her bedroom window one May morning to see Jessica in the garden trowel in hand, methodically uprooting the orange marigolds that had bordered the walkway for 15 years. Flowers planted alongside the stepping stones Michael had made as a child. The sight ignited something primal in Ellie's chest. Without stopping for a sweater despite the morning chill, she hurried downstairs and out the back door. "Jessica, what are you doing to my garden?" Jessica looked up momentarily startled before her features composed themselves into practiced innocence. "Oh, I'm just improving the landscaping. Orange clashes terribly with the house exterior. Those flowers have been there for 15 years. They're beside Michael's stepping stones." Jessica's shrug dismissed decades of significance with a single motion. "The color scheme needs updating. I'm thinking of a more modern monochromatic approach. This is my garden, Jessica. My house." Ellie's voice trembled with an emotion she rarely allowed herself to express. "You had no right to remove those flowers without asking me." "I'm just trying to help." Jessica's voice took on the wounded tone Ellie had come to recognize as tactical rather than genuine. Already she was reaching for her phone. "I'll call Michael. You're completely overreacting." 20 minutes later, Michael's car screeched into the driveway, summoned by Jessica's urgent call about Eleanor, completely losing it over some flowers. He rushed into the backyard where Ellie still stood, arms crossed, beside the pile of uprooted marigolds. "Mom, what's going on? Jessica says you're really upset." "Your wife dug up the marigolds I've tended for 15 years, the ones planted beside the stepping stones you made me when you were 5. A flicker of recognition crossed Michael's face, a brief connection to the memory, before Jessica's hand on his arm seemed to refocus him. "They're just flowers, Mom. Jessica's trying to help improve the place." "Improve?" The word tasted bitter on Ellie's tongue. "This is my home, Michael. Mine. I've welcomed you both, but that doesn't give Jessica the right to erase everything that matters to me." Michael's expression hardened in a way Ellie had never seen before. Not the determined face of the boy who'd helped care for his dying father, nor the focused young man who'd worked his way through college. This was something foreign, a defensive hostility that transformed her son into someone she barely recognized. "If you can't live harmoniously with my wife, maybe we should find somewhere else to stay." The words struck Ellie like a physical blow. Jessica's triumphant expression flickered briefly before being replaced by a mask of hurt, her hand tightening on Michael's arm as she leaned into him. "I never meant to cause problems." Jessica's voice quavered perfectly. "I was just trying to help." Ellie stood amid the ruins of her garden, watching her son comfort the woman who had methodically dismantled her sense of home and belonging. Something fundamental shifted inside her. Not just grief or anger, but a dawning clarity about what was truly happening beneath the surface of renovations and redecorating. This wasn't about aesthetics or modernizing. This was about power and possession. Jessica wasn't merely staying in Ellie's home. She was colonizing it, erasing every trace of its history and replacing it with her own vision, a vision that had no room for Eleanor Thompson or her memories. As Michael led Jessica inside murmuring reassurances, Ellie remained in the garden, kneeling to gather the uprooted marigolds. Some might still be salvageable if replanted quickly. Her hands, weathered by decades of work and worry, moved with the determination that had carried her through widowhood and single parenthood. Eleanor didn't know then that this garden confrontation was merely prologue. The knowing voice of the universe seemed to whisper. The true test of her resilience and her relationship with her only son was yet to come. That evening, Ellie sought counsel from her oldest friend, Martha Wilson, a 70-year-old widow who had navigated similar waters when her son had married 5 years earlier. "She's marking territory," Martha observed bluntly over tea at her kitchen table. "Like those nature shows where animals urinate on trees." Ellie couldn't help but smile at Martha's characteristic forthrightness. "I thought I was being oversensitive." "Darling, you've been underreacting. This girl is systematically erasing you from your own home, and your son is letting her." Martha shared her own experience with a daughter-in-law who had attempted similar maneuvers, how they'd eventually resolved things through family counseling and the clear boundaries Martha had established. "I made it crystal clear my house, my rules. They could contribute to expenses and help with maintenance, but major decisions remained mine until such time as I chose to relinquish them." Armed with her friend's perspective and a recommended family counselor's contact information, Ellie returned home with renewed determination to address the situation directly. Perhaps a calm, mediated conversation could establish the boundaries needed for peaceful coexistence. Her resolve faltered momentarily when she entered the living room to find the furniture completely rearranged, her reading chair now relegated to a dark corner, family photos once again removed, and a large abstract print hanging where Robert's landscape painting had been for 30 years. Michael and Jessica were in the kitchen, her son hunched over his laptop while Jessica scrolled through her phone. Neither looked up as Ellie entered. "I'd like to talk with both of you." Ellie began steeling herself against the immediate defensiveness that flashed across Jessica's features. "About how we can make this living arrangement work better for everyone." Michael glanced up, wariness etched across his face. "Mom, if this is about the garden again." "It's about more than the garden. It's about respect and boundaries." Ellie took a deep breath, remembering Martha's advice about remaining calm but firm. "This is my home. I've welcomed you both gladly, but I need to feel comfortable here too." Jessica's scoff was barely audible but deliberately noticeable. Michael's expression tightened as Ellie continued. "I propose we establish some ground rules. Shared spaces remain as they are unless we all agree to changes. Personal spaces, your room for instance, are yours to arrange as you like. We consult each other before making changes that affect everyone." "So basically nothing can change because you'll never agree to anything modern." Jessica's tone dripped with false sweetness. "This house is stuck in the 1980s, Eleanor." The use of her full name rather than Mom, or even Ellie, highlighted the distance Jessica was deliberately creating. "That's not what I said." Ellie maintained her composure despite the provocation. "I'm open to reasonable updates. What I'm not open to is having my belongings moved or discarded without my knowledge or family mementos treated as if they're worthless." Michael's sigh carried the weight of a man trapped between loyalties. "Mom, please don't start. Jessica is just trying to help make the place more comfortable for everyone. By throwing away my things, by digging up my garden. How does that help anyone but Jessica?" Jessica's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly. "I don't have to sit here and be attacked. Your mother has made it perfectly clear she doesn't want me here, Michael. She's never given me a chance." Before either Ellie or Michael could respond, Jessica stormed from the room, footsteps thundering up the stairs, followed by the sharp slam of the guest room door. The sound reverberated through the house like the final gavel of judgment. Michael's expression hardened as he looked at his mother. "Why do you have to make everything so difficult? Jessica is trying her best in a tough situation." "Is she?" Ellie's voice remained steady despite the hurt blooming in her chest. "Or is she systematically taking over my home?" "It's always about you, isn't it?" Michael's words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. "Your home, your things, your way. Have you considered that other people might have needs too?" He pushed back from the table without waiting for her response, heading upstairs to comfort Jessica, leaving Ellie alone in the kitchen that suddenly felt foreign despite its familiar contours. That night, unable to sleep, Ellie wrote in her journal, pouring out her confusion and hurt. How had her generous offer of sanctuary become this battleground of wills? How had Michael transformed from her thoughtful, considerate son into this defensive stranger? Had she truly been selfish in wanting to preserve some elements of the home she'd built over 4 decades? Perhaps she wrote in the small hours, "I've been naive. I thought I was offering temporary shelter, but Jessica seems to be planning for permanence." The next morning brought an unexpected glimpse into Jessica's perspective. Passing the guest room while both Michael and Jessica were out job hunting, Ellie noticed the door ajar. She hadn't entered their space since they'd moved in, respecting their privacy even within her home. But a stack of home decorating magazines on the bedside table caught her eye along with what appeared to be fabric swatches and paint chips. Entering hesitantly, Ellie discovered printouts of senior living communities and a notebook open to a page titled House Renovation Budget After. The casual presumption stole her breath. This wasn't about temporary accommodation during hardship. This was a calculated plan to claim her home. More revealing was an open text conversation on Jessica's tablet, presumably forgotten in her haste to leave. Still working on the old lady, harder than expected but making progress. Michael's completely on board now. He practically apologizes for his mom existing. Another month, and I think we can suggest the assisted living option. The house needs work, but location is perfect for resale. The cold, tactical dismissal of Eleanor as merely an obstacle to be removed from her own home sent ice through her veins. This wasn't miscommunication or cultural differences between generations. This was deliberate manipulation of both Ellie and Michael. A forgotten photo tucked into the tablet case provided final confirmation Jessica, standing before a foreclosure sign at her previous address, dated 8 months earlier. Long before Michael's job loss, revealing the financial troubles they'd hidden and the premeditated nature of their move. As the pieces fell into place, Eleanor felt something shift within her. Not just anger, but a profound sadness for her son, clearly manipulated by a partner whose agenda extended far beyond what he realized. What broke Ellie's heart wasn't Jessica's schemes, but Michael's vulnerability to them. Somewhere along the way, her sturdy, principled son had become this malleable figure shaped by Jessica's influence and distanced from the values that had once defined him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bedroom floor as Ellie carefully replaced everything exactly as she'd found it and withdrew. Knowledge was power, but it was also burden. How could she make Michael see the truth without pushing him further away? How could she protect her home without losing her son? The answer came not through strategic planning, but through an act of unexpected defiance. That afternoon, Ellie drove to the garden center, purchasing flats of orange marigolds, identical to those Jessica had uprooted. With methodical care, she replanted them alongside Michael's childhood stepping stones, restoring the border that had graced her garden for 15 years. As she patted soil around the last plant, a shadow fell across the garden bed. Jessica stood on the path, arms crossed, expression thunderous. "What do you think you're doing? I just removed those yesterday." Ellie rose slowly, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. At 67, her knees protested the movement, but she stood straight, meeting Jessica's gaze directly. "I'm restoring my garden. These marigolds were planted when Michael's father died. They have meaning beyond your color scheme. This is exactly why Michael gets so frustrated with you." Jessica's voice took on the practiced tone of reasonableness. "You refuse to adapt to change. You cling to the past instead of moving forward. There's a difference between honoring the past and being trapped by it." Ellie responded, surprising herself with her calmness. "These flowers honor Robert and Michael's childhood. The stepping stones honor the boy who made them. This garden tells the story of our family. Well, it's Michael's family now too, and mine. Don't we get any say in how things look?" The question might have seemed reasonable to an outsider, but Ellie recognized the manipulative undercurrent. "You get say in your space. The guest room is yours to arrange. But you don't get to erase our family history." Jessica's facade cracked momentarily, revealing the calculation beneath. "This house is ridiculously outdated. It needs a complete overhaul if it's going to be worth anything." "Worth anything to whom?" Ellie asked quietly. "I have no intention of selling." A flash of something, annoyance alarm, crossed Jessica's face before she recovered. "I just meant in general, property values and all that." But the slip confirmed what Ellie had discovered that morning. Before she could respond, Michael's car pulled into the driveway. Jessica's expression instantly transformed, tears welling in her eyes with practiced precision. "Michael, thank goodness you're home," she called, voice trembling. "Your mother is being impossible again." Michael approached, looking between them with wary exhaustion. Seeing the newly planted marigolds, his expression darkened. "Mom, we just talked about this yesterday." "No, you talked. I listened. Now I'm telling you these flowers stay." Ellie's voice remained gentle but firm. "They're important to me, Michael. They're part of your father's memory, part of your childhood." "They're just flowers." Michael's voice rose in frustration. "No, they're symbols. Just like the photos Jessica keeps removing, just like my furniture she keeps rearranging, just like every piece of our family history she's systematically erasing." Jessica clutched Michael's arm. See how she twists everything? I'm just trying to help modernize this place, and she acts like I'm some kind of villain. Michael looked torn, glancing between the marigolds and his mother's resolute expression. Mom, you're making this into something bigger than it needs to be. Am I? Ellie took a steadying breath. Michael, this is about more than flowers or furniture. This is about respect. My home, my life, my memories deserve respect. Our home? Jessica interjected. Michael grew up here too. Yes, he did, but he chose to move out to build his own life. This remained my home where I've lived for 40 years, where I've maintained mortgage payments and repairs and property taxes. I welcomed you both during a difficult time, but that doesn't make this your house. Michael's face flushed with anger. If you can't get along with Jessica, maybe we should just leave. The threat hung in the air between them. Jessica's satisfied expression flickered briefly before resuming its mask of hurt. If that's what you want, Ellie replied, her heart breaking even as her resolve strengthened. But first ask yourself why you're defending someone who threw away your father's gift to me, who removes family photographs like they're trash, who treats my home, our family home, like a renovation project. Michael blinked confusion, momentarily replacing anger. What gift? What are you talking about? My sunflower mug, the last present your father gave me before he died. It disappeared last week. I found it broken in the trash. It was chipped, Jessica interjected quickly. I was going to replace it. It was deliberately broken, Ellie corrected quietly. Just like the stepping stones you made would have been next. Just like the family photographs that keep disappearing. There's a pattern here, Michael, if you're willing to see it. Michael looked down at the stepping stones bordering the marigold bed. Crude concrete slabs embedded with colorful marbles and sea glass, his name shakily inscribed in one corner. For a moment, something softened in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, of the boy he'd been, of the father who had helped him press those marbles into wet cement one summer afternoon. Jessica wouldn't, he began, but his voice lacked conviction. Wouldn't what? Ellie pressed gently. Throw away things that matter to us. She already has. Wouldn't try to change this house completely. Look around you, Michael. In 6 weeks, how much has already changed? Jessica's grip on Michael's arm tightened. Don't let her manipulate you like this. She's turning you against me because she's jealous of our relationship. But doubt had crept into Michael's eyes as he looked between the marigolds, the stepping stones, and back to his mother's face. For the first time in weeks, he seemed to truly see her, not as an obstacle or an inconvenience, but as the woman who had raised him, who had held their family together through Robert's illness and death, who had opened her home without hesitation when they needed shelter. I didn't know about the mug, he said finally, his voice low. I'm sorry, Mom. Jessica's expression hardened at this small concession. So you're taking her side now, after everything we've discussed. The question carried a weight that suggested private conversations Ellie wasn't privy to, plans made behind closed doors. Michael's hesitation confirmed it. I'm not taking sides, he said, the conflict evident in his voice. The mug was important to Mom, to both of us really. Dad gave it to her the Christmas before he died. I know, Jessica cut him off impatiently. Everything in this house has some tragic backstory that makes it untouchable. That's exactly the problem. We're living in a mausoleum. The callousness of the statement shocked even Michael, who stepped back slightly, creating distance between himself and Jessica for the first time since they'd arrived. That's not fair, he said quietly. What's not fair? Jessica's voice rose, abandoning pretense. Is being stuck in this outdated dump when we could be making it into something valuable. Your mother is being completely selfish, refusing to consider our future. Your future? Ellie echoed. What exactly do you mean by that, Jessica? The slip had been revealing. Not a place to stay until you're back on your feet, but a future claim on Ellie's home. Jessica faltered momentarily before recovering. Just that we're family too. We should have some say in our living environment. For a temporary stay, Ellie emphasized. That was the agreement. Jessica's laugh held no humor. Please, at Michael's age, with the job market what it is, we could be here for years. The casual presumption sent a chill through Ellie. Years of this territorial battling, years of watching her home and history systematically dismantled. The prospect was unbearable. Michael looked uncomfortable, caught between his wife's ambitions and his mother's boundaries. We don't know how long it will take to get back on our feet, he admitted. But Jessica's right that we need to make the space work for all of us in the meantime. Working for all of us doesn't mean erasing me, Ellie replied. It doesn't mean throwing away family heirlooms or uprooting memorial plantings or relegating family photographs to storage boxes. Jessica made a sound of exasperation. Everything with you is dramatic history and symbolic meaning. Some things are just things, Eleanor. That's what you don't understand. And some things are connections to the people and memories we cherish, Ellie countered. That's what you don't understand, Jessica. The fundamental disconnect hung between them uncrossable as a chasm. They weren't merely arguing about decor or gardening choices, but about values, about what home meant, about the weight and worth of history, about respect for others' emotional attachments. Michael shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn. Look, we're all tired and stressed. Let's just take a break from this conversation. It was the response of a man unwilling to choose sides, unwilling to see the deeper patterns at play. Ellie felt a profound sadness watching her son retreat into diplomatic neutrality rather than acknowledging the systematic erasure taking place under his roof. Under her roof. All right, Ellie agreed quietly. But the marigolds stay, Michael. That's non-negotiable. Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but Michael's warning glance silenced her. Fine, the flowers stay. It was a small victory in what Ellie now recognized as a much larger war. Not just for control of physical space, but for preservation of memory, for respect of personhood. As Michael led Jessica inside, Ellie remained in the garden, fingers gently touching the delicate orange petals of the marigolds she had replanted. The battle for Eleanor Thompson's home had begun in earnest. The universe seemed to whisper through the rustling leaves. But what neither Jessica nor Michael yet realized was that Eleanor had survived far worse than this conflict. She had weathered grief that would have broken lesser souls, had rebuilt life from the ashes of loss. And she would not surrender her sanctuary without a fight worthy of the love that had built it. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden, as Eleanor bent to water her newly planted marigolds, each one a small act of defiance, each one a refusal to be erased. Early morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Eleanor stood motionless, staring at a cardboard box on the counter. Inside lay her mother's china, the delicate ivory plates with gold trim that had been her wedding gift 45 years ago. The heirloom set had survived cross-country moves, family holidays, and decades of careful preservation. Until now. Time has a way of revealing what truly matters. The morning seemed to whisper, as Ellie gently lifted one of the plates, running her finger along a hairline crack that hadn't been there the day before. And sometimes what matters most becomes clear only when it's threatened. A sound behind her made Ellie turn. Jessica stood in the doorway, a trash bag dangling from her manicured fingers, her expression one of practiced innocence that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What are you doing with my mother's china?" Ellie's voice emerged steadier than she felt her fingers still cradling the cracked plate. Jessica shrugged, dropping the trash bag by the door. "It's chipped and outdated. We need new things around here." The casual "we" lodged in Ellie's chest like a splinter. "This set is over 70 years old. It belonged to my mother, who gave it to me on my wedding day. And now it's broken." Jessica's tone dismissed generations of history in 3 words. She reached for another plate from the cabinet, adding it to the box with deliberate carelessness. "Really, Eleanor, don't you think it's time to let go of all these old things? They're just collecting dust." The plate in Ellie's hands suddenly felt like the last barrier between preservation and erasure, not just of China, but of everything her home represented. "These aren't just things. This is my heritage, my history." Jessica's laugh held no warmth as she reached for yet another plate. "Well, maybe it should be our history now." The implication hung in the air between them, confirming what Ellie had suspected since finding those renovation plans. Jessica had no intention of this arrangement being temporary. She was systematically claiming ownership piece by piece. "This is my house," Ellie stated, her voice low but unwavering. "You and Michael are guests here. Guests don't throw away their host's belongings." Jessica's eyes narrowed, the facade of helpfulness evaporating. "Is that what you think, that we're just passing through?" Her fingers tightened around the edge of another plate. "Michael and I have discussed our future, Eleanor, and this house is a big part of it." Before Ellie could respond, the back door opened and Michael entered, stopping short at the tableau before him. His mother and wife facing off across the kitchen counter, a box of heirloom china between them, tension thick as summer humidity. "What's going on?" His eyes moved from the box to his mother's face, confusion giving way to wariness. "Your wife is throwing out my mother's wedding china." Ellie kept her voice level, determined not to be portrayed as hysterical or unreasonable. Jessica immediately shifted tactics, her expression softening as she turned to Michael. "I was just organizing honey. Some of these plates are damaged. I thought we could replace them with something more practical for everyday use." "They're not damaged," Ellie countered, displaying the plate in her hand. "This crack wasn't here yesterday, and there's nothing everyday about heirloom china that survived 3 generations. Michael's gaze darted between the two women, his discomfort palpable in the morning stillness. "Jessica wouldn't damage anything deliberately, Mom." The immediate defense of Jessica, without even examining the evidence, struck Ellie like a physical blow. When had her son become so willfully blind, so quick to dismiss her concerns? "I want you both to leave." The words emerged before Ellie had fully formed the thought, surprising even herself with their clarity and conviction. Michael blinked, momentarily stunned. "What did... You heard me?" Ellie placed the plate carefully on the counter, straightening her shoulders. "I want you and Jessica to pack your things and leave. Today." Jessica's laugh held genuine amusement this time. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." Ellie's calm belied the storm of emotions beneath her surface. "I opened my home to you both during a difficult time, and you've repaid that kindness by systematically dismantling my life. It ends now." Michael stepped forward, his expression a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. "Mom, you can't just kick us out. We have nowhere to go. You should have considered that before allowing Jessica to throw away family heirlooms, rearrange my home without permission, and treat me like an unwelcome guest in my own house." Jessica's amusement shifted to calculation as she assessed the unexpected resistance. "Fine," she declared, suddenly dropping the plate she held back into the box with a clatter that made Ellie wince. "If that's how you feel, we'll go." Before either Ellie or Michael could respond, Jessica brushed past them and headed for the stairs, her footsteps deliberate and heavy. Something about her too quick acquiescence sent a chill through Ellie's veins. Michael remained frozen, his face a study in conflicted loyalties. "Mom, please reconsider. We're family. We should be able to work this out." "Family respects boundaries, Michael. Family doesn't destroy treasured possessions or try to erase decades of memories. What's happening here isn't normal, and it isn't healthy." A crash from upstairs interrupted whatever response Michael might have offered. Both turned toward the sound, then toward each other with mirrored expressions of alarm. Ellie moved first, heading for the stairs with Michael close behind. The sound had come from her bedroom, a space Jessica had no reason to enter. When Ellie reached the doorway, the scene before her stole her breath. Jessica stood in the center of the room, surrounded by black garbage bags. Ellie's closet doors gaped open, half empty. As they watched, Jessica yanked more clothing from hangers, stuffing dresses and sweaters haphazardly into the waiting bags. "What are you doing?" Ellie's question emerged as little more than a whisper shock, temporarily overwhelming her composure. Jessica didn't even pause in her frenzied packing. "Since you're kicking us out, you can go too." The breathtaking audacity of the action, Jessica packing Ellie's clothes from Ellie's closet in Ellie's bedroom, momentarily defied comprehension. This wasn't mere disrespect or boundary crossing. This was psychological warfare. Michael finally found his voice. "Jess, stop. What are you thinking?" Jessica continued as if she hadn't heard, grabbing a handful of Ellie's scarves and tossing them into a bag already bulging with sweaters. Among them was Robert's old cardigan, the one Ellie still wore on cold evenings when memories of him felt particularly distant. Something shifted in Ellie's chest at the sight of that treasured garment disappearing into a garbage bag. Not anger, though, that simmered beneath the surface, but a curious, unexpected calm. A clarity that cut through months of doubt and second-guessing. A small laugh escaped her. Not of humor, but of revelation. "You know what's funny, Jessica?" Ellie folded her arms, her voice steady as bedrock. "You're packing the wrong person's clothes. This house is mine. Mine. Every brick, every floorboard, every memory. And you have no power here." Jessica faltered for the first time, momentarily caught off guard by Ellie's composed response. She'd clearly expected tears, pleading perhaps even a physical attempt to stop her. Not this steel-spined certainty. Michael stepped between them, his face flushed with confusion and mounting anger. "Mom, you can't talk to her like that." "Like what?" Ellie's gaze never left Jessica's face. Like she hasn't been systematically erasing my existence from the moment she arrived. Like she hasn't been manipulating you against me with tears and accusations while destroying everything I value. She's my wife. Michael's voice rose, hands clenched at his sides. And I'm your mother, the one who gave you a roof over your head when you had nowhere to go. The one who raised you alone after your father died. The one whose home you're now helping to dismantle. Michael's face contorted a complex mixture of emotions warring for dominance. His right hand gripped the back of the bedroom chair so tightly, his knuckles whitened his posture, radiating a tension that bordered on threatening. Don't talk to her like that, he repeated, voice dropping to a dangerous register Ellie had never heard from her son before. Fear fluttered briefly in Ellie's chest, not of physical harm, but of the stranger her son had become. The boy who had once helped her hang Christmas lights, who had held her hand at Robert's funeral, who had promised to always take care of her, now stood transformed by Jessica's influence into someone Ellie barely recognized. Go ahead, Michael. Her voice remained unnervingly calm, gaze steady on the white-knuckled grip he maintained on the chair. Make sure you hit hard enough to forget who stayed up when you had the flu, who worked double shifts to buy your first car, who cheered at every baseball game even when you struck out. The words landed with precision, each one a reminder of their shared history, a history Jessica couldn't erase no matter how many possessions she discarded. Michael's grip on the chair faltered, his gaze dropping to his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. You don't understand. He mumbled, the fire in his voice banking to embers. She's stressed. We both are. Jessica seized the momentary weakness, stepping forward with tears perfectly positioned at the corners of her eyes. See how she twists everything I'm just trying to help, and she attacks me, makes me out to be some kind of villain. Ellie had witnessed this performance too many times to be moved by it now. Stressed people don't throw family heirlooms in the trash, Jessica. Stressed people don't pack their mother-in-law's clothes in garbage bags. What you're doing is calculated, and I'm done pretending otherwise. She turned back to Michael, whose conflicted expression revealed the first cracks in Jessica's influence. I want both of you to leave. Today. Not next week, not when it's convenient. Today. You'll regret this, Mom. Michael's voice held more desperation than threat. Maybe, Ellie acknowledged with unexpected honesty. But I'd regret it more if I continued allowing you two to erase me from my own home. She turned away, then a deliberate dismissal that spoke volumes, and walked downstairs with measured steps that betrayed none of the turmoil churning beneath her composed exterior. Behind her, she could hear Jessica's urgent whispers and Michael's muffled responses, but she didn't turn back. In the kitchen, Ellie's hands trembled as she reached for the telephone, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision she'd just made. To choose self-preservation over peacekeeping, to prioritize her own dignity over Michael's convenience. It felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. She didn't call the police as she might have in the heat of the confrontation. Instead, she dialed Martha, whose practical wisdom had proven invaluable throughout this ordeal. They're packing my clothes into garbage bags, Ellie explained when Martha answered, her voice finally revealing a hint of the strain she'd been under. She couldn't bring herself to describe the moment when her son had gripped the chair with such barely contained rage. Martha's response was immediate and practical. I'm coming over, and I'm bringing Pastor Johnson. 15 minutes later, as Jessica continued her theatrical packing upstairs, and Michael oscillated between defending his wife and attempting to placate his mother, the doorbell rang. Ellie opened it to find Martha's sturdy figure flanked by Pastor Johnson, a gentle-voiced man in his 50s whose counsel had guided many families through difficult transitions. I thought we might benefit from a neutral perspective, Martha explained, squeezing Ellie's hand in silent support. Pastor Johnson's calm presence seemed to immediately diffuse some of the charged atmosphere as Ellie led them into the living room. Perhaps we could all sit down together and discuss what's happening. He suggested, his tone one of invitation rather than instruction. Michael appeared at the foot of the stairs, his expression hardening when he saw the visitors. You called reinforcements. I called friends, Ellie corrected gently. People who can help us communicate more effectively than we've been managing on our own. Jessica won't come down. Michael's tone suggested this was somehow Ellie's fault. She says she's not going to be ganged up on. Pastor Johnson nodded as if this were a perfectly reasonable response. That's all right. Perhaps you and I could speak privately first while Eleanor and Martha talk in the kitchen. The suggestion of separate conversations momentarily disarmed Michael's defensiveness. He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly, following Pastor Johnson into the small den that had once been Robert's office. In the kitchen, Martha wasted no time. "Let me see your bedroom." The destruction was even worse than when Ellie had left it. Drawers upended onto the floor, jewelry scattered across the dresser, clothing spilling from garbage bags like stuffing from a ruptured cushion. Martha surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes, her usual bluntness momentarily silenced by the sheer malice evident in the chaos. "This isn't just disrespect," she finally said, voice low. "This is cruelty." Ellie nodded, throat tight, as she bent to retrieve a silver locket from where it had fallen beneath the bed, Robert's gift on their 10th anniversary containing tiny photos of him and Michael. Martha helped Ellie gather the most precious items, jewelry, photographs, important documents, securing them in Ellie's sewing basket where they would be safe regardless of what transpired next. As they worked in companionable silence, Martha occasionally squeezed Ellie's shoulder or patted her hand, wordless gestures of support that meant more than any spoken reassurance could have. Downstairs, the murmur of male voices from the den suggested that Pastor Johnson was making progress with Michael. When Ellie and Martha descended 30 minutes later, Michael sat alone in the living room, his expression subdued, almost shamefaced. "Pastor Johnson went upstairs to try talking with Jessica," he explained, not quite meeting his mother's eyes. "Mom, I don't know what to say. You could start with an apology." Martha suggested, her tone gentle despite the directness of her words. Michael nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry. For all of this. For not seeing what was happening, for not listening when you tried to tell me." The words should have brought relief, vindication even. Instead, they filled Ellie with a profound sadness. What did it mean that her son could only recognize Jessica's behavior when outsiders confirmed it? What did it say about their relationship that he'd been so quick to dismiss her concerns, to defend actions that were objectively indefensible? "I trusted you, Michael." Ellie's voice remained steady despite the ache in her chest. "I opened my home to you both because you're my son and I love you. But love doesn't mean allowing myself to be erased." Michael's eyes filled with tears. Genuine this time, not the calculated performance Jessica had perfected. "I don't know how things got so twisted. Jessica told me you were criticizing her constantly when I wasn't around, that you made her feel unwelcome, that you were refusing to let us make any space for ourselves here." The extent of Jessica's manipulation unfurled between them like a poisonous flower. "None of that was true," Ellie said softly. "I welcomed you both. I tried to accommodate Jessica's preferences where I could. But she wanted more than accommodation. She wanted possession." Michael's hands twisted together, his wedding ring catching the afternoon light. "Pastor Johnson helped me see some things more clearly. He asked questions about patterns I hadn't noticed before, about how Jessica talks about the future, about this house." Ellie waited, giving her son space to continue his painful recalibration. "She's been talking about selling this place," he finally admitted, shame evident in his downcast eyes. "About convincing you to move into assisted living. She said it would be better for everyone, that the house was too much for you to maintain alone, that we could use the money from selling it to start fresh somewhere new." The confirmation of Jessica's plans should have angered Ellie, but instead it brought a strange sense of relief. She wasn't paranoid. She hadn't imagined the systematic dismantling of her home and history. "And you agreed to this plan?" Michael's hesitation was answer enough. "I didn't think about it as pushing you out," he said finally. "Jessica framed it as helping you, relieving you of the burden of homeownership. She made it sound like we'd be doing you a favor." Martha snorted softly beside Ellie, clearly unimpressed by this justification. "A favor by taking her home, the place she's lived for 40 years, raised you in, maintained by herself since your father died." Michael flinched under the deserved rebuke. "It sounds terrible when you put it that way." "Because it is terrible." Martha didn't mince words. "Eleanor isn't some senile old woman who needs decisions made for her. She's a vibrant, independent person whose home happens to be valuable real estate your wife has set her sights on." Pastor Johnson's return interrupted whatever response Michael might have offered. His expression suggested limited success with Jessica, who remained barricaded in the guest room. "Jessica has agreed to leave peacefully," he reported, "but she's refusing to participate in any group discussion. She feels she's being unfairly characterized." Ellie wasn't surprised. Without an audience to manipulate, without Michael's unwavering defense, Jessica's tactics lost much of their effectiveness. She'd retreat rather than engage on equal footing. I still want you both to leave today. Ellie reiterated her resolve unchanged, despite Michael's tearful apology. I can't continue living under this kind of psychological warfare. Michael nodded, the fight gone out of him. I understand. We'll go to Jessica's sister's place until we figure something out. He hesitated, then asked in a smaller voice, Will you ever let me come back? The question laid bare the true damage Jessica had wrought, not just to Ellie's home and possessions, but to the relationship between mother and son. Trust once fractured couldn't be restored with a single conversation or an emotional apology. You're my son, Michael. That doesn't change. Ellie chose her words carefully. But I need time and space to heal from this. And you need time to figure out what kind of man you want to be. The one who stands by while his wife dismantles his mother's life, or the one who remembers the values your father and I raised you with. Pastor Johnson suggested a path forward family counseling separate from whatever Michael and Jessica might pursue as a couple. A neutral space where Ellie and Michael could rebuild their damaged relationship with professional guidance. I think that's wise, Ellie agreed, relief mingling with lingering sadness. This isn't something we can fix in an afternoon. Michael nodded, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood that Ellie's heart constricted. For a moment she glimpsed the boy beneath the man the son she'd raised before Jessica's influence. The actual departure proved anticlimactic after the morning's drama. Jessica emerged from the guest room only when Michael had packed most of their belongings, refusing to acknowledge Ellie Martha or Pastor Johnson as she carried bags to the car. Her theatrical distress had transformed to cold fury, her previous tears nowhere in evidence now that they'd lost their effectiveness. Michael hugged Ellie before leaving, a tentative embrace that she returned despite the lingering hurt. I'll call about setting up that first counseling session, he promised, voice rough with emotion. Then they were gone, the sound of their car fading down the street, leaving an emptiness that felt like both absence and opportunity in their wake. Martha and Pastor Johnson stayed a while longer, helping Ellie begin the process of reclaiming her space. They restored her clothing to closets and drawers, righted overturned furniture, and gathered the scattered pieces of her life Jessica had strewn about in her vindictive packing. It's going to take time to feel at home again, Pastor Johnson observed as they surveyed the partially restored bedroom. Not just physically, but emotionally. Ellie nodded, running her hand along the quilt her grandmother had made, one of the few items Jessica hadn't managed to stuff into a garbage bag. I keep asking myself if I did the right thing, if I was too harsh. The right thing rarely feels comfortable when you're doing it, Martha replied, straightening a framed wedding photo on the dresser. Especially for women our age who were raised to accommodate rather than confront. You stood up for yourself with dignity, Pastor Johnson added. There's grace in that even when it's painful. After they left, promising to check in tomorrow, Ellie moved through her house alone for the first time in months. The silence held a quality she'd almost forgotten. Not the heavy silence of tension and unspoken grievances that had characterized recent weeks, but the peaceful quiet of solitude freely chosen. In the kitchen, she carefully unpacked the heirloom china Jessica had boxed for disposal. Some pieces were indeed cracked, now damaged in Jessica's careless handling. Ellie traced the fine gold rim of her mother's serving platter, remembering Thanksgivings and Christmases when it had held pride of place at the center of their family table. These cracks couldn't be undone, just as the fractures in her relationship with Michael couldn't be instantly healed. But broken didn't mean worthless. Damaged didn't mean destroyed. Night fell as Ellie continued the work of restoration, returning photographs to their places, rehanging the curtains Jessica had replaced, reclaiming each room with deliberate care. The house felt different now, vulnerable in ways it hadn't before Jessica and Michael's arrival, yet somehow stronger for having survived their attempted conquest. In the small hours, exhausted but unwilling to sleep just yet, Ellie settled in Robert's old armchair with a cup of tea and her journal. The emotional tempest of the day demanded processing reflection. Today I chose myself, she wrote the words, both declaration and discovery. Not selfishly, but in recognition that allowing others to erase me serves no one. Not me, not Michael, not even Jessica in her ruthless pursuit of what isn't hers. Rain began to patter against the windows, a gentle rhythm that had always soothed her. Ellie continued writing, exploring the complex emotions swirling within grief for the relationship with Michael that might never fully recover, anger at Jessica's calculated cruelty, and beneath it all a surprising current of hope. hope that from these painful ashes something healthier might eventually emerge. "I don't know if Michael will ever truly see what happened here," she concluded as the clock chimed 2. "But I see it clearly now, and I won't unsee it for the sake of false peace." She closed the journal and gazed around the living room, at the photos restored to their places, at Robert's landscape painting rehung above the fireplace, at the comfortable disorder of a space that reflected its inhabitant rather than someone else's vision. Her home might be emptier now without Michael's presence, but it was unquestionably hers again. Eleanor Thompson had spent a lifetime accommodating others, smoothing rough edges, making peace where none was offered in return. The night seemed to whisper as she finally climbed the stairs to bed. But on this rain-washed evening, she had discovered a different kind of strength. Not in yielding, but in standing firm. Not in silence, but in speaking her truth. And in that discovery lay the seeds of her rebirth. In the days that followed, Ellie moved through her reclaimed space with increasing confidence. She repainted the living room wall Jessica had changed to gray, restoring the warm yellow that had always reminded her of summer mornings. She rearranged furniture back to positions that made sense for her life, her comfort, her patterns of living. Martha visited regularly, bringing baked goods and practical advice in equal measure. Pastor Johnson checked in by phone, offering updates on the counseling arrangements he was helping coordinate between Ellie and Michael. Jessica's sister called once, surprisingly, to apologize for her siblings' behavior and confirm what Ellie had already suspected: Jessica's pattern of manipulation extended well beyond her treatment of Ellie. "She's always been like this," the sister confided, her voice heavy with an exhaustion Ellie recognized all too well. "Wanting what others have convinced she deserves more, willing to do whatever it takes to get it. Our parents enabled it. I'm sorry you got caught in her crosshairs." The conversation brought no joy, only confirmation that Jessica's behavior stemmed from deeper issues than mere generational differences or temporary stress. It reinforced Ellie's decision to establish firm boundaries, even as she grieved the pain Michael would likely face in coming to terms with his wife's true nature. A week after the confrontation, Ellie finally ventured into the garden to assess what remained of her beloved marigolds. Some had survived Jessica's uprooting, their orange blooms resilient despite the trauma. Others were beyond saving. Kneeling in the soft earth, Ellie carefully tended the survivors and planted new seedlings alongside them, not to replace what was lost, but to create something new from the disruption. As she patted soil around the last seedling, a shadow fell across the garden bed. Ellie looked up, momentarily tensing until she recognized Pastor Johnson's kind face. "I hope I'm not intruding," he offered, "but I wanted to check on you in person, and to tell you that Michael has agreed to our first counseling session this Thursday." Relief and apprehension mingled in Ellie's chest at this news. "Thank you for facilitating that. I wasn't sure he'd follow through." Pastor Johnson nodded toward the freshly planted marigolds. "Renewal always takes courage, for plants and people alike." Ellie brushed dirt from her gardening gloves, considering this simple truth. "The hardest part is knowing what can be salvaged and what must be released." "Indeed," the pastor agreed, helping Ellie to her feet with gentle courtesy. "But I've rarely met anyone better equipped to make that distinction than you, Eleanor." The unexpected compliment warmed her more than the afternoon sun. After so many weeks of having her judgment questioned, her concerns dismissed, her very perceptions challenged, the simple acknowledgement of her discernment felt like rain on parched soil. That evening, alone in her reclaimed home, Ellie set her small table for one. She placed a vase of fresh-cut marigolds at the center, their vibrant orange a defiant celebration of survival. From the china cabinet, she selected one of her mother's plates, cracked but still beautiful, still functional despite its imperfection. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across her garden, illuminating the new growth alongside the established plants, the fresh beginnings beside the weathered survivors. Ellie stood at the window, watching as darkness gradually gathered, feeling the quiet strength of a woman who had faced erasure and refused to disappear. Eleanor Thompson's battle for her home had been won, the evening whispered as she turned from the window. But the greater victory lay in rediscovering the woman who had been there all along beneath the accommodations and compromises, a woman of backbone and boundaries, of dignity and determination, a woman who would never again mistake peace for surrender. The first rays of sunrise streamed through freshly washed curtains, casting hopeful patterns across Eleanor Thompson's living room floor. 2 weeks had passed since Michael and Jessica's dramatic departure, and the house had begun to breathe again. Not in the same rhythm as before. Trauma changes even the most solid foundations, but with a steadier cadence that whispered of healing. The beginning of restoration rarely announces itself with fanfare. The morning light seemed to say as it touched the newly repainted yellow walls. More often it arrives in quiet moments of decision, in small acts of reclamation that accumulate like brushstrokes, until one day the canvas of life shows a picture entirely different from what was there before. Ellie stood barefoot on the cool hardwood, surveying her progress. Martha had helped her rearrange the furniture, moving the reading chair back to its favored spot near the window, repositioning the coffee table to its rightful place before the sofa. The photographs Jessica had repeatedly hidden away now adorned the walls and side tables in greater numbers than before, a deliberate statement of presence and persistence. Yet for all the physical restoration, certain spaces still carried emotional shadows. The kitchen cabinet where her sunflower mug had resided remained a small puncture wound of memory each morning. The corner of the garden where Jessica had uprooted marigolds showed tentative green shoots, but lacked the vibrant blooms that had once defined it. Recovery, Ellie was learning, moved at its own unpredictable pace, honoring no schedule but its own. The doorbell's chime interrupted her contemplation. Martha stood on the porch bearing a small clay pot with a flourishing African violet, and a determined expression that suggested today's visit wasn't merely social. "Time for phase 2, Martha announced, placing the violet on the hall table and heading straight for the kitchen with the familiarity of decades of friendship. "We've cleaned up and reclaimed. Now we renovate. On your terms." Phase 2, as Martha called it, involved actual improvements Ellie had postponed for years. Not Jessica's misguided modernizing, but thoughtful updates that honored the home's character while addressing its genuine needs. The leaky bathroom faucet that had dripped for months. The loose banister spindles Robert had meant to fix before his illness. The outdated light fixtures that no longer provided adequate illumination for Ellie's aging eyes. "I've got Hank coming to look at the electrical." Martha continued, pulling a notepad from her purse. "And my nephew can repair that broken window latch in the guest room. Time to stop living with broken things, Eleanor." The statement carried weight beyond home repairs. Ellie had grown so accustomed to working around what was damaged, in her house and in relationships, that confronting and fixing had begun to feel foreign, almost indulgent. "I found something yesterday," Ellie revealed, opening a drawer to retrieve a document she'd discovered while organizing her desk. "Jessica and Michael had an appointment with a real estate agent 3 weeks ago while I was at my dental cleaning." Martha's eyes widened as she scanned the paper. A pre-listing assessment detailing the property's market value and necessary improvements for maximum return on investment. "They were actively planning to sell your house without telling you." Ellie nodded, the betrayal still fresh despite everything else she'd discovered. "The agent made notes about convincing the current owner or exploring other options. I suppose those other options involved continuing to make my life miserable until I agreed to move into assisted living." Martha's indignation provided unexpected comfort, validation that Ellie wasn't overreacting, that the violation was as significant as it felt. "Have you told Pastor Johnson about this for the counseling?" "Not yet. Our first session is tomorrow. I'm still deciding how much to share, how much Michael might have known." The question of Michael's complicity hung between them, thornier than any home repair decision could be. Had he been fully aware of Jessica's schemes, a willing participant in the planned appropriation of his mother's home, or merely manipulated by a wife whose designs he hadn't fully comprehended? That afternoon, Hank, Martha's eternally taciturn handyman friend, replaced outdated wiring and installed new fixtures throughout the house. Each improvement felt symbolically significant, illuminating corners that had remained in shadow too long. "You know," Hank offered in a rare moment of conversation as he finished installing the last overhead light, "sometimes systems look fine from the outside, but they're all corroded within. Can't just patch them up. Gotta replace the whole thing to be safe." The wisdom in this gruff assessment wasn't lost on Ellie. Some damages couldn't be repaired. They required complete renewal. As darkness fell and the new lights cast their clearer, steadier glow throughout the house, Ellie felt a corresponding clarification within. About her home, her boundaries, and what reconciliation with Michael might require. The first counseling session arrived with gray skies and a nervous flutter in Ellie's stomach that reminded her of court dates during her years as a legal secretary. Pastor Johnson had arranged for them to meet at a neutral location, The small counseling room annexed to his church, rather than his formal office, a space designed for comfortable conversation rather than hierarchical interaction. Michael arrived 5 minutes after Ellie, his face showing the strain of recent weeks. New lines had formed around his eyes, and his customary precise grooming had given way to a 2-day beard and rumpled shirt. He stopped in the doorway upon seeing his mother uncertainty written in every line of his body. "You came—" He finally managed the relief in his voice, suggesting he'd half expected Ellie to cancel. Ellie nodded, maintaining her composure despite the surge of complex emotions his presence triggered. Love and hurt, hope and wariness all tangled together like the wind chimes Robert had hung on their front porch, impossible to separate into distinct notes. Pastor Johnson guided them gently through the awkward beginnings, establishing ground rules that emphasized listening without interruption, speaking from personal experience rather than accusation, and committing to the process despite discomfort. Simple principles that nonetheless felt revolutionary after months of defensive reactions and manipulated narratives. Michael spoke first at the pastor's suggestion, his account of recent weeks revealing a painful awakening. "Jessica and I are taking some time apart. She's staying with her sister still. I've moved into a temporary apartment." The revelation hung in the air, neither surprising nor satisfying to Ellie. Jessica's absence created space for honesty, but accountability required more than physical distance. "After what happened at your house," Michael continued, gaze fixed on his clasped hands, "I started noticing patterns I'd been blind to before. How Jessica would tell me one version of events, but when I'd witnessed something directly, it wouldn't match her account. How she'd make me doubt what I'd seen with my own eyes." Pastor Johnson nodded encouragingly, creating space for Michael's difficult realizations. "The real estate agent called me," Michael's voice dropped lower, shame evident in his hunched shoulders, "asking if we were still interested in listing the property. I had no idea what he was talking about at first. Then I remembered Jessica mentioning that eventually we might help you downsize, that we should explore options. I never authorized anyone to assess your house for sale." Ellie's fingers tightened around the tissue she'd been unconsciously shredding. "But you discussed the possibility of my moving to assisted living, of you two taking over my house." Michael's painful swallow was visible across the room. "Jessica raised it as something to consider someday. She framed it as concern for your well-being, that maintaining the house was becoming too much. I never agreed to any immediate action, Mom, I swear. But I didn't shut it down completely either. I let the conversation happen." The admission carried more integrity than denial would have, but still burned like salt in an open wound. Her son had entertained discussions about removing her from her home, had created space for Jessica's machinations, even if he hadn't fully endorsed them. "There were other calls, too." Michael continued, the words emerging with visible difficulty. "Credit inquiries. Someone tried to access your accounts using my devices. The bank flagged it." The implications stole Ellie's breath. Financial manipulation beyond the emotional and psychological warfare she'd already endured. Not just claiming physical space, but attempting to access resources to create vulnerability beyond the emotional realm. Did Jessica admit to this? Pastor Johnson's question carried no accusation, just gentle inquiry. Michael's bitter laugh held no humor. "Jessica doesn't admit to anything. She explains, justifies, redirects. She said she was trying to help organize your finances, Mom, that you'd mentioned being overwhelmed." "I never said any such thing." Ellie's response emerged sharper than intended. "I know that now." Michael's voice cracked on the admission. "I know." The session continued with careful navigation of raw emotional terrain, establishing factual timelines separate from interpretations, identifying patterns that had enabled the situation to escalate. By its conclusion, an exhausted truce had formed. Not reconciliation yet, but a foundation upon which it might eventually be built. As they parted in the parking lot, Michael hesitated by his car. "I found something," he offered quietly, reaching into his jacket. "In Jessica's things when I was moving out." He extended his hand, revealing shards of yellow ceramic wrapped carefully in tissue paper, the broken pieces of Ellie's sunflower mug. "She kept them," Michael's voice reflected his confusion at this detail, "after deliberately breaking it, like some kind of trophy." Ellie accepted the fragments with steady hands, their edges no longer sharp but worn smooth by repeated handling. The preservation of what Jessica had destroyed struck her as profoundly revealing. Victory not in creation, but in demolition power, measured by its ability to inflict lasting damage. "Thank you for returning these," Ellie managed, tucking the pieces into her purse. Not for restoration, some breaks couldn't be mended, but for proper laying to rest for closure that Jessica had attempted to deny her. The drive home unfurled through rain-slicked streets, windshield wipers keeping rhythm with Ellie's churning thoughts. Michael's revelations had confirmed her worst suspicions while simultaneously offering the first tentative bridge across the chasm that had formed between them. Not enough for full reconciliation, but perhaps enough to begin. Days merged into weeks as April's showers nurtured the new plantings in Ellie's garden. The marigold seedlings developed sturdy stems and promising buds. Inside the house continued its transformation, not back to what it had been before Jessica and Michael's arrival, but forward into something new that honored its history while embracing necessary change. Ellie and Michael met weekly with Pastor Johnson each session, excavating another layer of damage, examining the foundations that had allowed such destruction to occur. Michael revealed more about Jessica's manipulations, how she'd isolated him from friends who questioned her behavior, how she'd created crises that needed his immediate attention whenever he planned time with his mother, how she'd rewritten their financial history to position herself as savior rather than spender. "Classic patterns," Martha observed over coffee after Ellie shared these revelations. "My sister went through something similar with her second husband. Took her 3 years to see it clearly, and she lived with the man. You spotted it in months despite Jessica's best efforts." The observation offered unexpected comfort, recognition of Ellie's discernment rather than criticism for having welcomed Jessica initially. "I still feel foolish for not seeing it sooner. Manipulators succeed because they exploit decent people's tendency to assume others share their basic values," Martha replied, stirring another spoonful of sugar into her coffee. "Your openness wasn't weakness, Eleanor. It was humanity." By the 5th counseling session, Michael had begun bringing small offerings, not as bribes for forgiveness, but as tangible acknowledgments of harm done and amends attempted. A package of marigold seeds from the specialized nursery across town. A book of poetry Ellie had mentioned months ago. A wind chime crafted from sea glass that caught the light in ways that reminded her of the stepping stones he'd made as a child. "I've been thinking about what you said," Michael began during their 6th session, more confident now in claiming space to speak. "About respect being the rent, about boundaries. I never understood how completely I'd failed to defend yours." Pastor Johnson nodded encouragement as Michael continued his difficult self-assessment. "When I was a kid, you taught me that love means protecting the people who matter to you. Somehow I twisted that into thinking I needed to protect Jessica from consequences, rather than protecting you from her actions." The insight marked a significant shift, from justification to genuine accountability, from defensive posturing to vulnerable self-examination. Not complete transformation, but the necessary beginning of one. "Jessica has requested couples counseling," Michael revealed toward the session's end. "She says she wants to work things out." Ellie's stomach tightened at this development, though she kept her expression neutral. Jessica's patterns suggested this was tactical rather than genuine. Another maneuver in a complex game of manipulation. "What do you want, Michael?" Pastor Johnson's question cut through potential assumptions. Michael's lengthy silence revealed the question's complexity. "I don't know anymore," he finally admitted. "For so long, what I wanted was shaped by what Jessica convinced me to want. I'm not sure I know how to want things independently now." The raw honesty of this admission touched something deep in Ellie's chest. Recognition of how thoroughly Jessica had compromised her son's autonomy, how completely she had reshaped his perception of himself and his needs. Not justification for his actions, but context that fostered compassion alongside accountability. On a rain-washed Saturday 6 weeks after the confrontation, Ellie opened her door to find Michael standing on the porch, soaked in somber, no umbrella despite the downpour. "I need to tell you something," he began without preamble. "Jessica's been having an affair with the real estate agent who assessed your house." The revelation explained fragments of the puzzle that had remained mysterious. The speed with which the assessment had occurred, the detailed notes about Ellie's schedule, the insider knowledge of property values in her neighborhood. "How did you discover this?" Ellie stepped aside to let him enter, noting the uncharacteristic dishevelment of his appearance, as if he'd dressed and departed in haste without his usual methodical preparation. "Credit card statements, hotel charges, text messages I shouldn't have seen. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She said she needed someone who understood ambition, who wouldn't hold her back with sentimentality. The betrayal had clearly shattered something fundamental in Michael. Not just trust in Jessica, but faith in his own judgment, his ability to discern authenticity from performance. Ellie guided him to the kitchen where she prepared hot tea with the automatic gestures of a mother tending a wounded child, regardless of that child's age or the complexity of his hurts. "I keep thinking I should have known." Michael's voice emerged rough with exhaustion as he cradled the steaming mug. There were so many signs, the unexplained absences, the defensive reactions when I asked basic questions, the constant criticism of anything that didn't align with her vision. Ellie allowed him space to process, recognizing that her validation now mattered less than his own dawning clarity. "She talked about your house constantly." He continued, gaze fixed on some middle distance. "Its potential value, how outdated it was, what it could sell for with the right renovations. I thought she was just planning for someday for a distant future. I never realized that she was actively working toward it," Ellie finished gently. "That the real estate assessment wasn't theoretical." Michael nodded, passing a hand over his face. "The agent, David, has been coaching her for months on how to position things with me, on how to make your living situation seem untenable, on how to document evidence that you couldn't manage independently anymore." Each revelation landed like another stone in the foundation of understanding they were painfully constructing together, not erasing what had happened, but providing context that might eventually enable moving forward. "I filed for divorce yesterday." Michael finally stated the words, emerging with quiet finality. "Jessica threatened to contest it, to tell everyone what a controlling nightmare you are, but David apparently advised against it. Better for her to extract what she can and move on quickly." The pragmatic cruelty of this calculation aligned perfectly with Jessica's demonstrated character. Relationships evaluated solely for their utility discarded when they ceased to serve her purposes. Ellie felt an unexpected wave of gratitude for having discovered Jessica's true nature before the damage had become irreparable. "What happens now?" she asked, not of the divorce proceedings, but of the fragile reconnection between mother and son. Michael's exhale carried the weight of uncertain futures. "I don't know. I've taken a small apartment near the tech corridor, 3-month lease while I figure things out. The new job starts next week." The tentative question remained unspoken between them, whether their healing had progressed enough for Michael to occasionally stay at the house, whether Ellie could trust him in her space again after what had transpired. Neither rushed to answer, recognizing that authentic repair couldn't be forced or artificially accelerated. May bloomed into June, bringing warmer days and longer evenings. Ellie's garden flourished with renewed attention, the marigolds lifting vibrant orange faces to the sun, new perennials establishing themselves alongside surviving plantings. Inside the house had undergone subtle transformation, not Jessica's dramatic overhaul, but thoughtful adjustments that honored both history and Ellie's current needs. The broken china pieces had been carefully arranged in a shadow box with a small brass plaque engraved simply "Heritage Survives." The dining room walls now displayed photographs documenting 4 generations of Eleanor's family, including new prints developed from negatives Martha had helped her locate in the attic. The kitchen gleamed with updated fixtures that maintained its vintage charm while improving functionality. Regular counseling sessions with Pastor Johnson continued, joined occasionally by Martha, when specific issues benefited from her forthright perspective. Michael had begun individual therapy as well, working through the complex aftermath of Jessica's psychological and emotional manipulation. "The hardest part," he confided during their 8th joint session, "is accepting that I didn't just fail to protect you, Mom. I actively participated in your erasure. I defended Jessica's destruction of your belongings. I prioritized her comfort over your dignity in your own home." The stark self-assessment reflected genuine progress. Recognition without deflection, acknowledgement without qualification. Not enough by itself to heal the damage done, but an essential foundation for whatever relationship might eventually emerge from the wreckage. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," Ellie offered carefully. "Not as forgetting or pretending harm wasn't done, but as releasing the expectation that the past could have been different." Pastor Johnson nodded encouragement as she continued articulating the complex emotional work she'd been undertaking. "You made choices I wish you hadn't," she told Michael directly. "Choices that hurt me deeply, but I can acknowledge that those choices were made in the context of Jessica's manipulation without absolving you of responsibility for them." Michael accepted this difficult truth with a nod, neither defensive nor self-flagellating. Progress from earlier sessions where he'd either minimized his role or assumed excessive guilt in ways that centered his feelings rather than Ellie's experience. By mid-July, tentative new patterns had established themselves. Michael visited on Sunday afternoons, often bringing groceries or completing small repairs around the house. He never stayed overnight, recognizing that Ellie's bedroom remained her sanctuary, her privacy non-negotiable after Jessica's violation of that space. Their conversations grew less guarded, though certain topics remained tender to the touch, requiring careful navigation. For Ellie's 68th birthday in late July, Martha suggested a small celebration. Not to pretend everything's fixed, but to acknowledge what's been reclaimed. The gathering took shape organically. Pastor Johnson and his wife brought homemade rolls and summer salad. Hank, the taciturn handyman, appeared with an intricately carved wooden box for Ellie's sewing supplies. Michael arrived early to help arrange the backyard seating, placing chairs in the dappled shade of the maple tree that had witnessed 30 years of family gatherings. As afternoon eased into evening, the small group shared stories and laughter that gradually loosened the constriction Ellie had carried in her chest for months. Not erasing what had happened, but demonstrating that joy remained possible, despite it that community endured beyond individual betrayals. Michael had positioned himself slightly apart from the others, observing more than participating, still finding his place in this reconfigured reality. When Ellie brought out coffee and the birthday cake Martha had baked, he approached with a small wrapped package. "It's not much," he prefaced, awkwardness returning as he extended the gift. "But I thought..." Inside the careful wrapping, Ellie found a ceramic mug, not attempting to replicate the irreplaceable sunflower one Jessica had destroyed, but a new vessel painted with marigolds in vibrant orange against deep blue. Substantial in the hand, clearly handcrafted rather than mass-produced. "There's a pottery studio near my apartment," Michael explained. "I've been taking classes on Thursdays. The instructor helped me with the glazing, but I made the form myself. It's not perfect, but it's beautiful." Ellie interrupted, genuine appreciation warming her voice as she traced the slightly uneven rim. "Thank you, Michael." The moment crystallized something essential about their ongoing recovery. Not restoration to what had been before, not pretending damage hadn't occurred, but creation of something new that acknowledged both loss and possibility. Imperfect, showing the marks of its making, but functional and beautiful in its own right. As twilight deepened and strings of garden lights illuminated the gathering, Martha raised her glass in an impromptu toast. "To Eleanor Thompson, who taught us all that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, to rebuild what others have tried to dismantle." The simple tribute brought unexpected tears to Ellie's eyes. Recognition not of victimhood, but of resilience, not of what had been endured, but of what had been overcome. Later, as guests departed and Michael helped clear the last plates, an unfamiliar car pulled into the driveway. Jessica emerged immaculately dressed and visibly startled to find Michael still present. "I came to drop off your mother's necklace," she announced with brittle politeness, extending a small jewelry box toward Ellie. "I found it among my things during packing." The pearl pendant inside had been Robert's gift on their 20th anniversary, last seen on Ellie's dresser before Jessica's vindictive packing spree. Its return, now timed to coincide with Ellie's birthday celebration, carried unmistakable calculation, a performance of generosity designed to revise the narrative Jessica had created. "How thoughtful of you to return what was never yours to take," Ellie replied, evenly accepting the box without the gratitude Jessica clearly expected. Jessica's practiced smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I've always valued family heirlooms." "Have you?" Ellie's question carried genuine curiosity rather than sarcasm. "That hasn't been my experience." The direct challenge to Jessica's self-presentation clearly disoriented her. She glanced toward Michael, seeking the defender she'd cultivated, but found only careful neutrality in his expression. "Well, Jessica recovered with practiced grace. I just wanted to ensure it was returned safely. Happy birthday, Eleanor." As Jessica's car disappeared down the street, Michael released a breath he seemed to have been holding. She's still trying to rewrite reality. Some people can't tolerate being the villain in anyone's story, even when they've earned the role, Ellie observed, securing the necklace in her pocket rather than putting it on. Its return mattered, but the timing and performance surrounding that return revealed Jessica's unchanged nature. They finished clearing the yard in companionable silence, the brief interaction with Jessica having clarified through contrast how far they had traveled in their healing journey. Not completion, but progress. Not forgetting, but moving forward with clearer understanding. As Michael prepared to leave, he hesitated by his car. "There's something I've been wanting to ask. The job's going well and the apartment lease expires next month. I've been thinking about buying a small place, maybe that craftsman house near the library that just listed." The unspoken question hung between them, whether moving back home temporarily might be an option while he sorted out housing. Ellie recognized the crossroads they'd reached, the significance of her response in determining their path forward. "I think that craftsman would suit you beautifully," she replied gently but firmly. "You need your own space, Michael, and I need mine." Rather than disappointment, something like respect flickered across his features. "You're right. I just thought—" "I know," Ellie acknowledged the unfinished thought. "But boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. For both of us." Michael nodded, accepting this truth with a maturity that would have been unimaginable months earlier. "You've taught me more in the past 3 months than in the 38 years before." He embraced her briefly before departing, the gesture conveying both connection and respect for the separate spaces they were learning to occupy healthily. The next morning dawned clear and bright summer sunshine streaming through windows that sparkled from Martha's energetic cleaning before the party. Ellie carried her coffee, in the new marigold mug, to the back porch, settling into the cushioned chair to survey her flourishing garden. The marigolds stood tall and vibrant along the border of stepping stones, their orange blooms a testament to persistence and renewal. New plantings had taken root alongside them, different varieties selected for their beauty and resilience rather than their replication of what had been lost. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes Robert had hung decades earlier, their melody mingling with birdsong from the maple tree. Ellie closed her eyes, absorbing the symphony of her reclaimed space, not unchanged by what had transpired, but transformed in ways that honored both damage and healing. Eleanor Thompson had discovered an unexpected truth in the ashes of betrayal. The morning seemed to whisper as sunlight warmed her face. That dignity isn't granted by others, but claimed by oneself. That boundaries aren't walls, but foundations upon which authentic relationships can be built. That age brings not just vulnerability, but clarity about what deserves protection. She opened her eyes to find a monarch butterfly hovering near the marigolds, its delicate wings catching the light in flashes of orange and black. The creature's migration journey would carry it thousands of miles through countless hazards, guided by instincts both fragile and indomitable. Ellie smiled as she watched its graceful progress from flower to flower, recognizing something of herself in this small being's determination. The path forward would bring its own challenges. Continued negotiation of boundaries with Michael, vigilance against Jessica's potential manipulations, the inevitable adjustments that aging would require. But sitting in her garden, surrounded by evidence of renewal, Ellie felt a certainty that transcended circumstance. She had weathered the storm not by being immovable, but by being deeply rooted in her own worth. Not by refusing to bend, but by refusing to break. Not by denying vulnerability, but by embracing the strength that comes from surviving it. The butterfly ascended on a current of warm air, a brief flash of brilliance against the summer sky, before disappearing over the roofline. Ellie watched its departure without regret, then turned her attention back to the garden before her, to the beauty that remained, to the growth that continued, to the peace she had reclaimed, not despite difficulty, but through it. And in that moment of quiet appreciation, the universe seemed to whisper through rustling leaves and gentle breezes. Eleanor Thompson understood the most profound lesson of her 68 years, that respect, from others and from oneself, was indeed the rent due for occupying space in this world, and she had finally unequivocally paid her own price in full.